If you ever think about making a pact, remember these words: not all deals can be undone. I learned that lesson the hard way. It was a moonless night. The kind of night where the sky looks like a wall of absolute blackness, with no stars to guide the way. I had been riding for hours, maybe days, trying to escape a fate that already seemed sealed. The Holloway Ranch, which had belonged to my family for generations, was doomed. The land was dry, cracking like chapped skin under the scorching sun. The cattle, once my pride, were now just a pile of bones scattered across the dead pasture. The debts were piling up, and the bill collectors knocked on my door more than the wind rattled the windows. I was desperate, lost. That's when he appeared. At first, I thought the heat was playing tricks on me, one of those mirages that appear in the middle of the desert. But as the figure riding the black horse approached, a strange chill ran down my spine. The man, if you could call him that, was dressed in black from head to toe. The wide-brimmed hat hid part of his face, but his eyes, those eyes glowed in the wrong way, like embers beneath the shadows. And when he smiled, I realized that it wasn't a smile at all. It was a grotesque imitation of one, as if someone who had never experienced joy was trying to reproduce the expression. He sized me up for a moment, and then he spoke. "I have heard your pleas, Jim Holloway. I know what you need." His voice was unlike any other I had ever heard. It was neither deep nor high-pitched. It had no accent, no emotion. It was like an echo, a sound that vibrated inside my head, not in my ears. I felt my blood run cold. I tightened my grip on the reins of my horse, trying to appear firm. But the truth is that my body wanted to run away from there. "Who the hell are you?" I asked, my voice more shaky than I would have liked. The man in black tilted his head slightly, as if my question amused him. "Let's just say I'm someone who can offer you a solution for a price." That's when I understood what he was. My grandfather used to tell stories about the stranger on the road, a man who appeared when all was lost, a man who offered everything you wanted in exchange for something no one understood until it was too late. He leaned forward slightly, as if he were about to share a secret. "All you have to do is sign here." He pulled out an old yellowed parchment, along with a quill that looked like it was made of human bone. "I will give you riches, prosperity, and everything you desire. In return, I want something very simple." He paused before saying the words I already knew were coming. "Your soul." My fingers were sweating. The parchment seemed to vibrate slightly, as if it were alive, pulsing in my hands. The quill had a sharp point, already soaked in a dark, thick ink, almost like blood. My heart was pounding. What did it really mean to lose your soul? I didn't know. None of my grandfather's tales explained that. They only said that no one ever went back to being the same. But at the same time, I was dying. If I didn't accept, I would lose everything: my ranch, my dignity, my name. The man in black kept his distorted smile and spoke calmly, as if he already knew what I was going to do. "Time is running out, Jim. What will it be? Wealth and the salvation of your ranch, or continue in misery?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to throw that paper on the ground and run away from there as fast as possible. But the part of me that was still clinging to despair signed. As soon as I wrote my name, I felt the world change. The air became heavy. The sky, once moonless, now displayed a moon as red as blood. The man's black horse neighed unnaturally, as if thunder had come out of its throat. My own horse reared up, trying to flee, and I barely managed to hold it. A sharp chill ran through my body, from the inside out, as if something had just been ripped from me. The man in black took the parchment with a precise movement, storing it somewhere under his dark coat. And then he said something I will never forget. "Good boy." He spoke in the tone of a teacher praising a student for completing a difficult test. But I knew at that moment I had made a mistake that could not be undone. I no longer belonged to myself. The man in black tipped his hat to me, still smiling, and disappeared. There was no hoarse neighing. There was no dust being raised. He simply wasn't there anymore. The silence that came after was worse than any noise he could have made. And then the crickets stopped chirping. The wind ceased. And on the horizon something began to move, something big, something that had already been coming to get me. The ground beneath my feet trembled slightly, as if something were awakening from beneath the earth. The air around me became dense, heavy, charged with a suffocating heat that came from nowhere. It was as if, for a brief moment, the world itself held its breath. The man in black smiled and reached out to me. At the same instant, something appeared in the air, as if it had been pulled from an invisible rift. An aged leather pouch, which fell into his palm with a satisfying weight. He threw it in my direction, and the metallic sound of gold clashing inside it made my heart race. "Here is your initial reward, Jim Holloway." His voice was low, drawn out, but resonated inside my head like distant thunder. "The rest will come in due time." I took the pouch instinctively. The leather was rough and warm, as if it had been recently ripped from some creature. The iron smell emanating from it made me feel slightly nauseous, but when I opened it and saw gleaming gold coins, I ignored any warning signs. The man in black turned slowly and began to walk away. His black horse followed him without making a single noise, its hooves gliding across the ground as if they weren't even touching the earth. But before he disappeared completely into the darkness, he stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Remember, Holloway." His voice now had an almost amused tone, as if he were mocking me. "Everything has a price. Yours is already marked." Then he vanished. There was no sound. There was no dust rising in the air. He simply wasn't there anymore. But I felt it. I felt that he was still watching me. In the days that followed, something incredible happened. The rains returned. The sky, once dry and relentless, opened up in torrential storms. My land, which had once looked like a shriveled corpse, began to bloom again. The pasture grew strong and green. The cows gained weight as if they had been fed by the gods. The money started coming in. The debts, which were suffocating me like invisible chains, simply disappeared. The bank called me for a meeting and, inexplicably, said that my records had disappeared, as if they had never existed. The people of the town began to talk about me. The man who reversed his luck. The farmer who brought life back to condemned lands. But I didn't feel happy. Something inside me wasn't right. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw that wide, distorted smile. Whenever the wind blew hard at night, I heard his voice, whispering, laughing, waiting. The night was quiet on the ranch. Caroline had already gone to sleep, and I was alone in the living room, drinking whiskey and trying to ignore the thoughts that haunted my mind. That's when I heard it. A dull sound, deep inside the house. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I slowly turned my head towards the living room door, which led to the dark hallway. And I saw it. There was something there. A tall, motionless shadow standing in the shadows. It took my eyes a few seconds to adjust, but when they focused, two bright spots stared at me from the darkness. Eyes. My lungs filled with ice. The air around me became heavy, as if someone had put a sandbag on my chest. I knew I wasn't alone. Deep inside the house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I slowly turned my head towards the living room door, which led to the dark hallway. And I saw it. There was something there. A tall, motionless shadow standing in the shadows. It took my eyes a few seconds to adjust, but when they focused, two bright spots stared at me from the darkness. Eyes. My lungs filled with ice. The air around me became heavy, as if someone had put a sandbag on my chest. I knew I wasn't alone. The figure in the shadows didn't move. It just watched me without haste. Fear ran down my spine like sharp blades. I wanted to get up. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't do anything. The shadows slowly began to take shape. The dark suit, the wide hat, the wrong smile, which seemed even bigger than before. The man in black. He was there, inside my house. Holloway. His voice was calm, drawn out, but laden with something deeply wrong. He took a step forward, and the sound of his boots echoed like thunder on the wooden floor. My body froze. It was as if I no longer had control over my muscles. The time has come. He tilted his head as if studying me. You didn't think you'd get all this for free, did you? The world began to darken. My heart was beating so hard that it felt like it was about to explode. Then he raised his hand, and the instant he did that, everything around me fell apart. The ground disappeared beneath my feet. I felt like I was falling into an endless abyss. The air was torn from my lungs. I couldn't scream. And then, when I opened my eyes, I was no longer on my ranch. The sky above me was red, pulsing as if it were alive. Twisted, leafless trees covered the horizon, their branches resembling deformed hands stretched upwards. The ground was dark, covered in a black, sticky sand. The smell was wrong. A stale, rotten odor like meat that had been left out in the sun for too long. In the distance, a river as black as pitch cut through the landscape, emitting a sickly vapor that slowly rose into the sky. I didn't know where I was, but I knew it was no longer my world. And then I heard the voice behind me. "Welcome to your new reality, Jim." I turned around slowly. The man in black was there, exactly as before, but something about him seemed bigger. His eyes were no longer just bright. They were open rifts in the very fabric of reality. He opened his arms, like a master of ceremonies before a grand spectacle. The show is just beginning. The man in black took a step forward, and the earth trembled beneath my feet. The shadows around seemed to breathe, as if they had a life of their own. The red sky pulsed, and an icy wind blew from nowhere, laden with the smell of sulfur and decay. "This is the place where those who make deals with me come to pay their debts." His voice was calm, almost paternal. "Here is where your soul resides now." I felt a despair wash over me, a coldness crawling inside my skin. I knew I had made a mistake, but it was too late. I tried to speak, to beg, but my voice wouldn't come out. My lips moved, but the sound was sucked into the void around me. The man in black leaned in, so close that I could feel his cold, stagnant breath brush against my skin. "Your soul is tied to this place, but fear not." The corner of his mouth rose in a sinister smile. "You can still enjoy your riches in the real world." He raised a finger and touched my forehead with a light, icy touch. "But remember, I will always be watching." Then the world spun around me. An invisible force pulled me, tearing me from that red hell, throwing me back to where it all began. Suddenly, I was on my ranch again. Silence reigned. The wind blew gently through the trees. The familiar smell of damp earth and leather saddles enveloped me. For a moment, I almost believed that none of that had happened, but I knew that wasn't the case. Something had changed, something dark, invisible, ever-present. At first, everything seemed normal. The ranch continued to prosper. My business grew, my reputation strengthened. People came to me, shook my hand, called me the lucky man. But I didn't feel lucky. The nights began to become a torment. Every time I closed my eyes, I returned to that place. The red sky, the black river, and him, always watching me from the shadows, waiting. His eyes glowed in the darkness like live embers. His smile never disappeared. He didn't need to speak. I knew what he wanted. My debt was still open. It was a few weeks later that I noticed something strange on my land. A group of crows swirled in the sky, cawing restlessly. They circled the same spot as if something were rotting down there. I approached slowly, with a knot in my chest, and then I saw it. The well, a well that had never been there before. The edges were made of ancient stone, worn by time, covered in inscriptions that I didn't recognize. The air around it was cold, icy, even under the scorching midday sun. I didn't know how, but I felt that the well was alive. I got off my horse, each step heavier than the last. I approached the edge, looked inside. Darkness, no bottom, no reflection of water, just an endless void. Then the smell came, sulfur, and soon after the voice. Cowboy. The whisper came from the depths of the well, cold and drawn out. Time is running out, the debt must be paid. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, feeling my whole body trembling. I looked around. The wind stopped. The sound of the crows ceased. I wasn't alone. I turned around quickly, expecting to find the man in black there, but there was no one. Still, the feeling of being watched never disappeared. That night, when I returned home, I found something waiting for me. On my desk, there was a letter. The paper was old, yellowed, but the handwriting, it was the same as the parchment I signed. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The well is the door. Cross when you are ready. The air in the room became heavy. My breathing became short. I tore the letter to pieces, but it didn't do any good. The message was already inside my head. I had to go back to the well. Each night the nightmares returned, always the same, the well, the voice, and him. The man in black standing on the horizon, watching, always watching. Time was running out. I knew that. So, on a moonless night, I went. The wind was still, the sky as dark as pitch. The well was waiting for me. Each step I took felt heavier, as if something were trying to pull me back. But I continued. I stood at the edge. I looked down. The darkness stared back at me. Then the voice came again. Choose, cowboy, wealth or oblivion. My heart was pounding in my chest. I closed my eyes, and then the world spun around me. I felt an intense coldness envelop me, as if I were being swallowed into an endless abyss. My breathing became short. My body became light. And then silence. When I opened my eyes, I was on my ranch, standing in the same place where it had all begun. The well. It was no longer there. The wind blew gently. The smell of wet earth and cattle filled the air. It was as if nothing had happened, but something was different. I went to my desk, feeling a weight in my chest. There, on the table, was a piece of paper, a note. My signature was on it, and below it, a single sentence, written in a fine, precise handwriting. We will see each other soon, cowboy. The paper seemed to pulse beneath my fingers. My head spun. The room around me seemed to shrink. I sat down slowly, trying to catch my breath. I tried to laugh. I tried to tell myself that this wasn't real. But then, in the mirror next to the door, for a brief moment, I saw him, standing in the corner of the room, the man in black. His reflection was smiling at me. But when I turned my head, there was no one there. Just the emptiness, the silence, and the certainty that the debt had not yet been paid.